You brought that to Varnak for? Instructor Kessel's eyes bulged slightly, though. For a Gelvian, that didn't mean much. The gelatinous folds above his optics quivered in what Elijah O'Connor had come to recognize as bafflement. Still, it was hard to be sure. Everything about the Gelvians looked like a water balloon on the verge of bursting. Elijah stood shoulder to shoulder with the other participants at the Interstellar Academic Exchange Summit, shivering slightly from the station's overpowered air filtration system. His thermal jacket had been lost sometime during re-entry, and he had yet to find an alien equivalent that didn't smell like hot latex. "I'm not a that. I'm a he," Elijah said, rubbing his hands together. "And I'm here on scholarship." Kessel turned and addressed the room of alien students, most of whom were some shade of blue or green and towered over Elijah like curious trees. "This is what some Terrans call a human. They are classified under Category 7 sentience. Fragile, meat-based, vocal, extremely susceptible to environmental extremes. Please observe caution when engaging." Elijah raised a hand. "I'm right here." "Yes," Kessel said without turning. "It can speak." The other students murmured among themselves. A tall, fur-limbed creature with translucent skin leaned slightly toward Elijah and whispered, "Is it true your species can only survive in narrow temperature bands?" "Well," Elijah said, "we've been to the moon. Some of us live in the Sahara, others in the Arctic. So, not that narrow." "You mean you tolerate those zones with the help of technology?" the creature replied. "By yourselves, you'd perish." "I mean, sure," Elijah said, "but that's kind of the point adapting." Kessel cut in. "Class, let's begin." The initiative was simple: interspecies interdisciplinary survival education, a fancy phrase for what amounted to a field trip. Each species would rotate through simulation environments meant to reflect the extremes of their home planets or, in this case, others. When they reached the Arctic simulation, Kessel's tone shifted. "Terran environments are dangerous," he said. "This simulation replicates the Arctic region of Earth. Temperatures here will drop below -30. We have programmed wind shear, ice fracturing, and limited visibility. It is not advised any of you spend more than 20 minutes inside without protective gear." Elijah glanced at the simulated entrance. The walls of the dome shimmered faintly with a projected aurora. He'd seen the real thing once, in Alaska, during a winter expedition with his uncle. Kessel continued, "The human will be excluded from this module. It is not suited for it." Elijah stepped forward. "Excuse me. You will observe from the control station. I didn't come halfway across the galaxy to sit out the one module I've actually experienced. It is for your safety. I've camped in -40 before. I know how to handle myself." The class fell silent. Kessel surveyed him. "You propose to enter the Arctic simulation unaided?" "No. I'll use what I'd normally take. A proper parka, snow boots, layered insulation. No exosuit. No thermal generator. Just what a human explorer would have." Kessel stared. "You will perish." "I won't." The class watched as Elijah suited up. His clothing was standard issue from his field kit: layered synthetics, a windproof outer shell, thermal gloves, and insulated boots. He checked the zippers, tightened the waist cord, and adjusted his goggles. "Ready," he said. Kessel sighed. The door hissed open, and the cold hit immediately. It was astonishing how well they'd simulated it. The wind was a living thing, slapping his face and howling past his ears. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he stepped out into the white void. The dome was enormous, easily 100 meters across, with artificial terrain mimicking the jagged ridges and crevasses of a polar ice field. The sky above flickered with false stars, and the wind carried tiny ice crystals that stung exposed skin. He moved methodically, setting up a small windbreak using collapsible poles and a thermal blanket. The blanket flapped violently as he anchored it. He crouched behind it and took a moment to assess his surroundings. His breath fogged the inside of his goggles. His toes were already tingling. He pulled out a compact stove and lit it with shaking hands. Elijah's voice crackled through the comlink. "Still alive." "Improbable," Kessel's voice replied. "Remain stationary. We will extract you in 3 minutes." "No need. I can move." He packed the stove, folded the windbreak, and began trudging toward a small outcrop in the distance. The snow deepened. He adjusted his gait, keeping his steps wide and deliberate. Inside the observation room, the alien students watched in silence. "He should be collapsing," one muttered. His core temperature must be plummeting, another added. Kessel frowned, monitoring the vitals. He is. Maintaining. Elijah reached the outcrop and used his eye sacs to test the slope. It held. He climbed onto a ledge, shielded from the wind, and settled into a crouch. "Still with me?" he asked. "I do not understand," Kessel said. "You are not engineered for this." "Neither are penguins," Elijah said, teeth chattering. "They just figured it out." Minutes passed. Then a sharp crack echoed through the dome. "What was that?" Elijah asked, standing. "Seismic shift," Kessel said. "An ice shelf is fracturing." "Evacuate now." Elijah turned, scanning the field. A long fissure had opened near the center, spider webbing outward. The snow beneath his feet trembled. "You're kidding me," he muttered. He started moving fast. The snow had become powdery, unstable. Every step sank deeper. Behind him, the ice groaned. "Elijah," Kessel said, "redirect to the north ridge. There is a stable bridge." He pivoted, heading for the ridge. Then, without warning, the ground gave way. He dropped like a stone. The fall wasn't long, maybe 3 meters, but he landed hard, his left leg twisting beneath him. Pain exploded in his knee. He gritted his teeth and rolled onto his side, gasping. "Status?" Kessel demanded. "Fell," Elijah said, his voice strained. "Leg's not right. We are dispatching a retrieval drone." "No, I can get to the ridge." He pulled himself upright, testing the leg. It held, barely. Every step was agony. He fashioned a crude splint from the stove rod and a broken tent pole. With his axe as a crutch, he began limping toward the ridge. It took 17 minutes. By the time he reached the ridge, he was shaking uncontrollably. His leg was swelling. His lips were cracked and bleeding, but he was still moving. The dome door hissed open. A retrieval unit hovered nearby, scanning him with a soft hum. Kessel met him at the threshold. "You were injured." "Yep." "You ignored extraction protocol." "Yep." "You survived." Elijah nodded, eyes glassy. "Barely." Kessel turned to the watching class. "Reassess your assumptions about Terran fragility." Back in the infirmary, Elijah lay on the scanning table while medical bots hovered over his leg. "Not broken," the medic announced. "Sprained ligament. Possible meniscus tear. You'll need crutches for 2 weeks, rehab for 6. Elijah leaned back, exhausted. "Better than a broken femur." Kessel entered the room. "You were reckless." "Maybe. You have redefined our expectations." Elijah closed his eyes. "That's what I'm here for." Kessel regarded him in silence for a moment, then left. One of the alien students, Relin, the translucent one, entered next. He stood stiffly at the foot of the bed. "I thought you were going to die." "So did I," Elijah said. "But I figured if I did, at least I'd be warm for the next 10 seconds. Relin blinked. "That was morbid. Human humor. I will study it further." Elijah chuckled weakly. "Good luck." He dozed off shortly after, exhausted and sore. The Arctic simulation had been real enough to leave frostbite on his right cheek and a lingering ache in his bones, but he'd proven something to them, and maybe to himself. By the end of the week, several of the alien students had begun requesting joint simulations. Kessel quietly authorized a mixed species module, and Elijah, crutches and all, was assigned as a consultant. There was no ceremony, no applause, just a quiet shift in perception. The human had survived the cold, and the cold had noticed. 2 days later, Elijah was lurching down Corridor 7C of the Varnak 4 Interstellar Learning Complex with a pair of crutches that screeched faintly every time the left one met the floor. His leg ached. His palms were blistered from the grips. His back was sore from sleeping flat on an alien cot designed for something with no spine. He was, by all reasonable definitions, miserable. "Are you malfunctioning?" asked a voice beside him. Elijah turned his head to find Relin pacing him effortlessly. The translucent alien's internal organs pulsed with lazy, almost bored rhythm as he matched Elijah's awkward gait. "Nope," Elijah grunted. "Just adapting. Your locomotion appears degraded. That's because I sprained my knee falling down an ice pit." "Yes," Relin said, tilting his head. "That was suboptimal." They reached the entrance to the mixed species simulation lab, where a curved panel blinked amber. A slender tentacle slid out from a nearby recess and tapped the console. "You're cleared," Relin said. "Thanks." Inside, the lab was already active. The environment this time mimicked a subtropical swamp from the planet Derux, a humid, low-gravity biome with waterlogged terrain and a bewildering array of airborne spores. Elijah adjusted the filter mask over his face and tightened the straps on his boots. His knee brace was snug beneath his pants, but every step still sent a hot pulse up through his thigh. A cluster of students had gathered near a floating instruction orb. They turned as he approached, their expressions unreadable. One of them, a shelled creature with multifaceted eyes, clicked softly. "You are not required to participate physically, human." Elijah leaned on his crutches and scanned the terrain. "I'm not here to sit in a corner." Relin stepped beside him. "His participation has been approved. He will be contributing observational data." The clicking creature tilted its head. "He is injured." "Still has eyes," Elijah muttered, then stepped forward carefully, deliberately. The swamp simulation was disorienting. The gravity was just light enough that each movement felt subtly wrong, like walking inside a dream. The surface beneath them was a spongy mat of fibrous plant matter, occasionally giving way to pockets of warm, shallow water. Strange insects flitted in the air, projecting low-frequency vibrations that buzzed in Elijah's teeth. The objective was straightforward enough: navigate to a central data node and retrieve a sample of airborne microbial film using a containment wand. For most of the students, it was a matter of calibration, adjusting their natural motion to the foreign gravity and unfamiliar terrain. For Elijah, it was more like surviving a three-legged race on a trampoline while being pelted with pollen. He planted the crutches carefully, swinging his good leg forward, then dragging the bad one behind. He made it 10 meters before the left crutch slid out from under him, and he pitched sideways into a shallow pool. The water was warmer than expected and smelled faintly metallic. He pushed himself upright, sputtering, and caught a glimpse of 3 students watching from the ridge. One of them whispered something. "You all right?" Relin called. "Awesome," Elijah said, wiping muck off his face. "Top form." He hauled himself out, adjusted the brace, and kept moving. Midway through the simulation, the terrain shifted. The spongy ground gave way to a series of floating root clusters that bobbed and twisted with each step. One of the students, something vaguely mollusk-like with a long prehensile tail, slipped and fell backward into a pit of moss-covered water. The student flailed, disoriented. Elijah paused. "You guys seeing this?" "He's struggling with the buoyancy shift," said Relin. "No kidding." The mollusk student was panicking. The more it moved, the deeper it sank. Elijah handed a crutch to Relin without waiting for a response and half-hopped onto the nearest root pad. It wobbled violently but held. He moved from pad to pad, each one threatening to collapse under his weight. When he reached the edge of the pit, he crouched, braced his bad leg awkwardly, and leaned forward. "Grab my hand." The student hesitated, then extended a slippery appendage. Elijah latched on and pulled. The motion sent a white-hot spike through his knee, but he didn't let go. Inch by inch, the mollusk came up, until finally it flopped onto the root pad beside him, heaving. Elijah collapsed backward, breathing hard. "You are functionally impaired," the mollusk said, still gasping. "You're welcome." The rest of the class watched in silence as the two of them made their way back. Relin returned the crutch without comment. Once they'd exited the simulation pod, Elijah peeled off the soaked filter mask and winced as he sat. "You should not have done that," said the shelled student with the clicking voice. "He would have drowned. The fluid depth was not lethal." "Didn't look that way. You were inefficient at risk assessment." "Probably," Elijah said, massaging his knee. "I just don't like watching people sink." Later that day, he found himself back in the medical wing. Not because he was required to return, but because his leg had started locking up and a deep, throbbing ache had set him behind the kneecap. "Swelling's worse," said the medic, a 4-armed insectoid with the bedside manner of a security drone. "Feels like a bowling ball in there. You require joint drainage." Elijah's stomach turned. "That sounds horrifying." "It is routine." The procedure was mercifully quick. A numbing agent was applied, and then a narrow tube inserted just beneath the kneecap to draw out the fluid. The sensation was deeply unpleasant, but not painful. Mostly it felt like someone had decided to vacuum his soul out through his leg. Afterward, the medic handed him a compress and a small packet of what looked like blue sand. "What's this?" "Anti-inflammatory porogen. Do not ingest." "Right." He hobbled out of the infirmary just as the artificial lights dimmed to simulate evening. Relin appeared again, this time holding a small container. "I have acquired sustenance." "What is it?" "Gelatinous protein derived from farron root." Mildly toxic to Decarnians. Possibly palatable to you. Elijah took a whiff. Smells like a shoe. I have no frame of reference for that. They sat on a bench overlooking the central arboretum, where plants from 6 different biospheres grew in slow, deliberate spirals. The silence was comfortable. You're not what I expected, Relin said eventually. Neither are you, Elijah replied. But you talk less than most of the others. I appreciate that. You act without certainty. That is unusual here. I act because waiting around usually makes things worse. Relin adjusted his posture. You could have let him sink. I didn't think about it. That may be your species' most dangerous trait. Elijah leaned back. We've been called worse. They sat a while longer, watching the plants twist toward invisible suns. By the end of the week, Elijah received a message float from the administration block. It hovered just above his head, blinking softly. Human Elijah, it said in a neutral tone. Your presence is requested at the Simulation Oversight Committee meeting, Cycle 3, Sector Room, 5B. He sighed. What now? Relin watched the float drift upward. You are being observed. Everyone here is being observed. No, you are being measured. The Oversight Committee was not what Elijah expected. There were no rows of stern-faced bureaucrats or screening panels. Instead, a circular chamber with tiered seating held a dozen representatives from different species, each surrounded by data streams and projection coils. At the center, a suspended platform hovered in an electromagnetic field. Elijah limped onto it. State your designation, said a voice from above. Elijah O'Connor. Earth. You have exceeded participation thresholds in 3 simulations, the voice continued. Explain your motivation. I didn't know there were thresholds. There was a pause. Then, your behavior is anomalous. I thought that was the point of this place. Some of the representatives exchanged glances, or the alien equivalents thereof. You are proposing that unpredictability is a functional asset. I'm saying if you expect everyone to fit the same mold, you're gonna miss a lot of good stuff. Another pause, longer this time. You will continue participating, the voice said, but you will be assigned to the anomaly cohort. Elijah squinted. That sounds ominous. It is a classification. Still sounds ominous. You may leave. He exited the chamber, confused but not particularly surprised. Relin was waiting outside, as always. What's the anomaly cohort? Relin walked beside him. It is where they send the ones they do not understand. Great. You may find it interesting. I'd better. They turned down the corridor. The lights dimmed further as the cycle ended, and the quiet hum of the facility gave way to the distant, rhythmic pulse of the artificial tide generators. In the quiet, Elijah muttered, I wonder what counts as normal around here. Relin didn't answer. He just walked on. Elijah sat on the edge of a low, padded table in the anomaly cohort's readiness chamber, trying to fish a stubborn piece of dried synthetic moss out from under his fingernail. The room had no corners. Everything curved walls, benches, even the ceiling, which pulsed faintly with ambient light like the inside of a jellyfish. The air smelled faintly of minerals and something else he couldn't quite place. Like wet rope. Across from him, a creature shaped like a bundle of reeds with too many knees adjusted the straps on its climbing harness. It glanced at him with a cluster of eyes near the top of its stalk-like torso. You intend to participate again? I've got legs, don't I? The creature paused, then nodded slowly. One of them appears compromised. Still counts. A chime sounded. The door dilated open without a hiss, revealing a tall figure in a ribbed exosuit. Its face was obscured by opaque shielding, but the wide-set shoulders and faintly pink tint of the armor suggested a yellowfin, one of the few species with a documented habit of recreational magma diving. This module is vertical terrain, the yellowfin said. You will be ascending a rock face under simulated Martian gravity, with intermittent tremor cycles and limited anchor points. Elijah slid off the bench, tightening the brace on his leg. Love a good uphill battle. The climbing wall was massive, at least 20 meters high, built inside a dome that rotated slowly to simulate centrifugal gravity. The lower third was covered in dust-fine sediment, while the upper portion jutted out in irregular shelves of rust-colored stone. A crimson haze hung in the air, filtering the overhead lights into a dull, angry glow. The rest of the cohort, all aliens, clustered near the base, checking equipment and calibrating their grip pads. Someone handed Elijah a harness without comment. As he examined the anchor system, A four-legged student with a narrow snout turned to him. "You are known for improvisation," it said. "This environment does not favor that." "Good," Elijah said, clipping the carabiner to his belt. "Means no one's expecting me to win." The ascent began smoothly enough. The gravity was lighter than Earth's, but dense enough to make every pull meaningful. Elijah's knee protested early, forcing him to rely more on his arms. The rock was dry, crumbling in places, and the first tremor hit just as he reached the midway point. The wall shuddered, a low vibration that seemed to echo inside his teeth. Above him, a ledge cracked and dropped a chunk of stone the size of a loaf of bread. It bounced off his shoulder and skidded down the wall. "Still with us, human?" came a voice through the comm unit. "Bit of a love tap," Elijah answered, flexing his fingers. "Let's keep moving." By the time he reached the final stretch, his shirt was soaked through and his muscles burned from the constant strain. His bad leg had gone mostly numb, but he could still feel the occasional jolt when he overextended. The last segment was a long traverse across an outward-sloping overhang. Others had already reached the top, watching from above as Elijah inched sideways, fingers scraping for purchase. Halfway across, his left foot slipped. His body swung away from the rock like a pendulum, anchored only by his right hand in a tenuous grip on a shallow groove. The harness tensed, but the line didn't catch. This section had no auto-lock. It was a free solo zone. He dangled for a second, legs kicking against the air, then twisted his torso and managed to wedge his foot into a vertical crack. The strain sent a fresh spike of heat through his knee. "Your vitals are elevated," the Yellowthan said through the comms. "Abort if necessary." "I'm not falling back down," Elijah grunted. With a heave, he planted both hands on the next ledge, pulled himself upward, and crawled the final meter onto the summit. He rolled onto his back, panting. One by one, the others turned toward him. No one clapped. No one said anything. But they watched. Later, in the debrief chamber, the Yellowthan approached him again. "You ignored 3 withdrawal markers. Didn't notice. You are aware this was not graded. I wasn't climbing for a score." There was a pause as the Yellowthan adjusted the angle of its helmet. "You do not operate like the others." "I get that a lot." The next afternoon, Elijah found himself back in the facility's biomechanical lab, lying flat while a diagnostic scanner slid over his injured knee. The screen showed a swelling of soft tissue and a small accumulation of fluid behind the joint. "You've got a Baker's cyst forming," said the attending medic, a pale, rubbery creature with too many elbows. "You'll need aspiration again." "Fantastic," Elijah muttered, staring at the ceiling. The medic prepared the syringe as Elijah adjusted his position. The needle slid in with a wet pop, and the pressure release was instant and unpleasant. "You're pushing too hard," the medic said without looking up. "You'll rupture the meniscus if you keep this up." "I've got 2 knees." "Not for long." Once the procedure was done, Elijah limped out into the corridor, where Relin was waiting with an expression Elijah had come to interpret as contemplative dismay. "You fell," Relin said. "Only a little. You deliberately placed yourself in a high-risk segment. Someone had to be last. You are attempting to prove something. Not to you." Relin followed as Elijah made his way toward the Arboretum again. They passed a group of younger students, first rotationers, who fell quiet as he hobbled by. "You are becoming symbolic," Relin said. "I'm not interested in that." "They are." At the edge of the Arboretum, Elijah sat on the same bench, stretching his leg carefully. "You know what I think," he said, watching the spiral-leafed plants sway in their artificial breeze. "I think you all thought humans were glass. But we're more like rubber bands. We bend, we stretch, and then we snap back." Relin said nothing for a long moment. "Then, sometimes, rubber bands break." Elijah chuckled. "Sometimes, but not today." Later that evening, a message was delivered to his room by a small hovering disk that chirped softly and projected a simple statement onto the wall. "Human Elijah, you are relieved from scheduled simulation duties for the next cycle. Recovery is mandatory." He stared at it for a moment, then lay back on the cot, letting the tension bleed out of his shoulders. The next morning, he didn't report to the cohort chamber. Instead, he returned to the central learning hall, where holographic archives lined the walls and species from across the quadrant sat in isolated booths, studying. He found an open terminal and began compiling notes, detailed breakdowns of the simulations he'd completed, modifications he'd made to his equipment, pain levels at various stages, and recovery timelines. He submitted them to the central database under Human Field Notes, Adaptation Profiles. A week passed without further incident. Then, while crossing the courtyard on his way to the commissary, he noticed a small group of students gathered near a projection kiosk. The feed showed a clip from the climbing simulation as fall, the recovery, the final pull to the summit. Someone had overlaid telemetry data and a side-by-side with another species attempt. Relin appeared beside him. They're running comparative analysis. I didn't authorize that. You submitted your logs. Elijah watched as the data cycled through. One student pointed at the screen and said something he couldn't hear. Another nodded. He turned away. I didn't come here to be impressive, he said. That is irrelevant, Relin replied. You are. The final module was voluntary. A zero-oxygen cavern crawl designed by the Ulnath species in anaerobic environment with collapsing pathways and limited visibility. Only 2 others signed up. Elijah declined. Instead, he met with Kessel in the instructor's atrium, where a soft blue light filtered down from hundreds of tiny aquatic bulbs floating overhead. You've had an impact, Kessel said. I wasn't trying to. Intent is overrated. They sat in silence for a moment. I'm returning to Earth in 2 weeks, Elijah said. Cycle ends. I've got a flight. Will you return? Depends if I'm invited. Kessel reached into a drawer and withdrew a small data crystal. This is for you. It contains a compilation of your simulations. We will be studying them. Elijah took it without ceremony. Thanks. You have redefined the parameters of human endurance. I just got cold and climbed some rocks. And yet, they stood. No handshakes. No formalities. Elijah stepped back into the corridor and exhaled. By the time he reached his quarters, the hallway was empty. He closed the door behind him, placed the crystal on his desk, and finally let himself lie down without pain. The knee brace was off, the swelling had gone down, and for the first time in weeks, he wasn't burning, freezing, falling, or climbing. He didn't feel delicate. He felt human, and somehow that was enough.